particles, and this is a particle accelerator used for physics experiments, looking for particles, or sometimes neutron sources are used for material science. X-ray, 3D imaging, or for physics experiments, or you want to for particles, or sometimes neutron sources are used for material science. X-ray, 3D imaging, or
Excuse me. In the meanwhile, Wolverine, Martin.
Walter, are you okay?
I am. What's wrong?
Promise? You sure you're not sick?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
He's coughing like for days now.
Oh, so we have been just joined by Mark Nelson, and we've been discussing this. I believe it's what is this? It's a experimental reactor, but it is neutron source, pardon. And it was, creating some concerns here specifically because there was Russian kind of push from Russian propaganda or disinformation regarding these allegations that Ukrainians are about to build some kind of a nuclear dirty bomb and use it against Russian forces or whatever, just as preparation, or Russian propaganda preparation for false flag attack. So again, this news piece immediately got picked up and it was discussed. So Mark, can you elaborate a bit about that particular site and what it entails?
Sure. So first of all, people who are very into these nuclear technologies get mad when you call it a reactor. They say it's not a reactor, and their claim is that because it is not possible for it to go critical, that is, neutrons do not multiply to higher levels in it. Let me explain what this is. It is true that it's probably the highest uranium enriched device in the country. So uranium enrichment is when you take the natural ratio of uranium-238, which is very stable, and uranium-235, which is quite stable, but a little bit less so. And so over the life of the solar system, it's been decreasing in content. Most reactors in the world currently operate at between 3% and 4% uranium-235 enrichment. Natural uranium is 0.7%. Bomb grade uranium is something like 80% and above uranium-235. The most extreme operating reactors are also highly enriched from what we know, like the military marine reactors. Well, this device was right below the threshold of the boundary arbitrarily used as highly enriched. It was 19.9%, I think, is what my team dug out. So we know it was that because the US did a big program around the whole world to take every device everywhere that they could find that had higher enrichment than 20% and bump it down. So this device is technically called an accelerator-driven subcritical assembly. Assembly because it's got chunks of uranium put close together. Subcritical because it cannot achieve a neutron multiplication above 1. That is, if you have neutrons pop out somehow, they're going to make on average probably something like 0.9 other neutrons until all the neutrons fade away and you just sit there. Accelerator driven. The way this works is that you shoot some particles at it, neutrons, and then you get it to react a little, but never with multiplying neutrons. And if you want more, you have to pump it with another beam from the accelerator, if that makes sense. So this thing is very small. From what we could gather, the uranium-235 content was, again, just below 20%, and there was something like 1.5 on the order of like 1.3 kilograms of U-235, meaning the entire thing in terms of uranium was like, I don't know, like less than 10 kilograms. Yeah. So this whole thing was wrapped up in a big heavy shell and had a beam that fired into it, and it Rafael Manuel Grossi, head of IAEA, says that it has been destroyed, and he seemed a little bit irritated by it. He's pissed off. This was a beloved research facility. This device was used for all sorts of research experiments that involve needing neutrons to pop around and hit things, and it has been damaged to the point of destruction. It's been totaled. All the noise and nonsense above it is just noise and nonsense. I can't comment on who was trying to make people think what was going on, but the device itself is it's kind of a non-entity. In terms of what would have happened if you had been able to strip away all the shielding and like blow up just the contents of the thing there, like I guess, I mean, the point made by the specialists that I've talked to is that there were almost no fission products in this device. Fission products. So what is this? These are the elements, the specific flavors, radioactive flavors of certain elements that are of the highest biological concern when you have an event like a meltdown. For example, I'm getting reports now that all across Europe, people are panic buying and panic distributing iodine tablets, potassium iodide. So that is to pop out of more amounts than zero, but smaller amounts than required to destroy your thyroid completely. You can end up with cancer later. Iodine 131 as applied by a doctor is a health treatment, but you've got to destroy the whole tissue. You cannot just do half damage. That can leave you with a good chance for getting thyroid cancer. Right. So iodine 131, almost none of it in this small, like 6 kilogram device, right? So everything about what they could have done with it or might have done or any damage that could have happened if it got blown up, all of it was just nothing.
you think we've lost sound? Let me try catch up. This is unacceptable. Unacceptable. Sorry, eh? Alright, see if I can find out why there's no sound. I'll tell you what, I'll just leave and start again. There was no logical reason for that sound to have disappeared on us. Oh, I see. Looks like the whole feed got mumbo jumboed. So now we should be getting back to sound status. If you're with me, you have lots of patience. Okay, let me try. Reducing resources. Sorry, I have to do this, but such it is. Let's reduce the resource. Okay, well. Oh, you know what happened? That whole thing just shut down. I'll go right back into it. Here we go.
The bomb thing was a Russian propaganda thing from the start. Does anybody can be this because of there was a joke like, oh yeah, we are going to make dirty bombs, and from that on the Russian propaganda machine always referred to dirty bombs out of Ukraine. Anybody remembers this story?
Yeah. I'm trying to recall what you're referring to, but I'm just gonna jump in and ask: have we spoken about the Red Cross statement that the green corridor that Russia had prepared from Mariupol was full of landmines? It's been confirmed.
How about that?
It's been confirmed. Like I'm watching, like partially watching the Dominic Steelhart's director of the operations for the International Committee of the Red Cross's interview, and he is legitimately saying that that civilian humanitarian corridor was full of mines, and the guys are stating that it's one of the war crimes if it happened, but like genocide would have been like inevitable for sure. It's like every time you think there isn't even something worse than this, and every time they keep bringing something worse than this. Like,
I have a question. That was today, as I reckon. That was today.
Yeah.
I hope nobody used that road.
No. We don't trust them. Plus, we would have never sent our guys to Russia. It's a betrayal for us. We will liberate them, but sending them to Russia, it's just like it's just a torture for them. It's basically like death penalty right away.
Yeah, well,
Awesome.
they are shifting towards this strategy of bombing. Well, they shifted already towards the strategy of bombing residential areas, which is grim.
Going
Do we
for
have
Syria.
any questions for Mark since he's here? And specifically,
Maybe anger.
Can you talk quickly? It sounds like you had a little bit more time or pre-existing knowledge on that reactor, the research reactor. Look, I was only able to look in the time that that the previous commenter had raised the issue. I saw that it came online in October, so it hadn't been on, in use for very long, which is probably why people are pretty upset about that. But my question for you is, as a particle accelerator, is it pretty similar in use and function to like Argonne National Labs advanced beamlines, or is it completely different?
It's gonna be way smaller and way lower energy. I'd have to look up what it actually is so because a lot of my work in the last day has been trying to figure out what actually happened that night at Zaporizhia and how strong, durable, and well equipped the reactors are. Like, where's the control room located physically on the plant? How's it guarded? What's the access? I only looked at the Kharkiv device enough to see that my team was on it and was saying it's not an issue. There aren't many fission products. This is the picture of it, that sort of thing. I would just say, as anyone who's messaged me during these few nights know, I get back to everyone. Anybody who wants the specific information and photos and stuff, just shoot me a message and I'll zip you the main things of importance to look at. There's some Twitter threads from some good experts you can trust that I can get to you. In terms of the particle accelerator, I don't know if I would assume it's meant to have a few different experimental purposes. Most of the particle accelerators I've been around are the ones in this big complex in Los Alamos where some are short, some are curled, some are straight, some are long, and they smash different particles into different things with different energies. In this case, I'm almost certain it's a neutron particle accelerator, but at that point I'm departing my specialty.
To add to that, and I'm happy if you find anything out further than what you already know, is neutron particle accelerators are a pretty new thing in experimental physics. So it's double sad to lose that thing, I think.
Yeah, you should be able to rebuild it with either donations or donor countries after the war.
Of course.
So, Lucky, do you have a question for Mark?
Yes, hello, Mark. I have a question for you because we keep talking about, nuclear plants, and we keep to forget the people that are actually working in these plants. And I think they've been absolutely extraordinary, going through what they're going through. So do you have any knowledge about, their well-being and everything?
Yes. So first, IAEA is in contact and says things are good. The operating company says things are good. It continues to be a bizarre situation where in occupied Energodar, Ukrainians at gunpoint, depending on the way you want to put it, are making electricity for sale and use of Ukraine, while Russia is there. Russia doesn't have a way to use the electricity, but also anyway, it's a very, very odd situation. I would much rather be at this point an operator at Zaporizhia than a maintenance caretaker at Chernobyl. First of all, your mission is critically important to the lives and safety of millions of your countrymen. Chernobyl is, I'm so sorry to say it, it's basically make work. It's like 2,400 jobs at a plant that doesn't operate, and there's a little bit of science done, but it's really just like hanging out and chilling and filing papers and watching the sensors. So let's go back to that. Let's go back to the facility. One of the most interesting comments I got on Twitter the very first day this was breaking out, and I was starting to talk about the professionalism and the quality of the operators. I don't know the Zaporizhia operators. I know nobody at Energoatom. It's kind of a blank spot on me in the world map of nuclear people that I know. However, I do know that there's a pretty shared culture, all things considered, of nuclear plant staff and operators. It's sort of like commercial airline pilots, in which you have a lot of people's lives in your hands, and international groups work incredibly hard, so cooperatively, to make sure that no one nuclear plant anywhere causes a problem that causes everyone else's nuclear plants to have a hard time. Everyone's kind of in it together, which is part of the real betrayal of trust in some ways of the capture of this plant, if you're an operator who's now there in a town that's occupied by Russia. So I imagine they have strange feelings about that as they go about very professionally executing their jobs. Right, a little sidetrack. The Twitter comment I got was from a guy who does water chemistry at a nuclear plant in the West. I can't remember which plant in the West, but it's his job to keep continually checking water every single minute to make sure it's exactly the right pH and has exactly the right trace chemicals in it to operate the plant in optimal state. So in this case, it would be like exactly the right concentration of boron dissolved in water as boric acid to selectively absorb some neutrons so that they can control the reactor with just little differences in boron supply in the water. Right. So this water chemistry guy is checking the water chemistry all shift. And when he posted on my Twitter, what he said was, well, I don't know what's going on in their minds. This is the night of the battle, remember? The night of the fight in the parking lot. I don't know what's going on in their minds, but I definitely would have worked until killed without changing my role. LOL. And I was like, I get exactly what he means. The nuclear plant operators I know, most of whom are like the Diablo Canyon operators in California who I work with to try to save their plant, they go into mission mode where nothing can break them from exactly the discipline of the task at hand. I would imagine that that's what the folks are at Zaporizhia, the same attitude. And sure enough, they however this ends, and I hope it ends well, everybody, they will get to say they kept the lights on in eastern Ukraine as a firefight raged outside and the world lost its shit. They did not. They kept one of the reactors at 60%. They kept that part of the grid energized. And within a few days, they had 2 reactors on, and they've settled into probably a slightly weird, slightly stressful normalcy for now. I think that's what I'd want everybody to hear about the plant staff.
Thank you, Mark. New Yuki, you have a question.
Yeah, Mark, thank you. Great analysis. Too scientific maybe for me. I'm not in nuclear technologies, but it reminds me somehow this movie, this outstanding movie, Occupied. So it's about Norwegian energy business when Russians come and basically take it over. That's what's happening in Zaporizhia today. That's what's happening in Kharkiv today. We are so well educated. We are so intelligent. Not me, but most of us. And we're looking like this villain coming to our sphere, and with those uneducated officers, soldiers, they just shoot to it. And we just, oh yeah, oh great work doing those Ukrainian scientists. Oh, sorry, they lost this piece of art equipment. Seriously, guys, we have to learn how to switch sometime. Is it not a good time to kick out all Russian scientists from the network of scientists? Is it not time to act a little bit, to be a little bit tough, even in the scientific world, as it is business world now, kicking out all business connections, losing money because of it, but this understanding that it cannot be tolerated? Why Russian citizens still part of the global scientific community? Is it not self-destructive? Is it not, I don't know, is it even intelligent to keep them equal because they allow their government to act like this? Thank you. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a tricky one. Honestly, it's one I'm struggling with today. A absolutely lovely gentleman who's a young man who works for Rosatom and is trying to work on which young people from around the world of nuclear were going to come to Atom Expo in Sochi in May, and And, you know, I'd met the Rosatom heads in Glasgow for the climate conference. They were really supportive and great with all of us young people from around the world who were there for nuclear. And it's all come crashing down. And I talked to this guy, and he's still hoping that those of us in the nuclear community are going to find ways to come to Sochi in May. And I was just like, I don't know if I should have been more like what you said, where it's like, I'm not even taking your call, I'm deleting your contact. I mean, this guy was sad. He's like, we were supposed to do this meeting, all the young Rosatom people, and they changed the Microsoft Teams the day of and deleted our passcodes from it. And I'm just like, guys, you should expect a lot more where that comes. For myself, I don't really have some strategy. I don't know if I properly have it in me for some kid that I've worked with to just cut off and say, I cannot talk to you again. Not going to go to Atom Expo, but I don't know. I think it's a very difficult concern. And I don't know if my particular job, making sure I cut off any contact with Russia until the war stops. I don't know. I don't know if I have much more to say to this gentleman, but like, it's a really hard issue. I don't have answers, but I've had to face it today.
How about telling him, you're a good man. I believe you're a good man. Come over here, work here. You staying there, you try to helping this horrible, horrible government. Your compatriots keeping, maintaining, and cherishing. So you either come here and work with us, or come to other country, civilized country, or just buy. Sorry, because we have to be a little bit man, right? It doesn't matter how much educated we are, how much sophisticated we are, but something kind of tough has to remain in our brain somewhere, in a part of our body, saying that enough is enough. It doesn't matter how much you're intelligent, how much you're nice, but if your government doing that and you're not protesting openly, you either come here or goodbye. I'm sorry. Of course, my situation is simpler. I'm kind of not in rocket science, but that's what I think.
I think the invitation got through. Very nice invitation.
Like, so your intent is to exclude a Russian scientist, am I right?
No, just exclude them from Russian government. So bring them to the West, and don't let them help the government to develop.
Okay, I gotcha.
I see all sources all the time raising his hand. Want to add something?
And
I have a follow-up question. Can I ask my second question, please?
Of
for
course.
Mark?
Go ahead.
So the question is, so obviously the world can see now that, Europe alone, relying on wind turbines and solar panels and Russian supplied gas is not enough. So hopefully, finally there is future for nuclear energy. How can we build a community so within the 10 and 15, maybe 20 years, we actually have enough scientists like the
Becoming open-minded about nuclear is good. I think it's a very important time. They're about to suffer a lot of backlash, I think. And then we're finally in a time where fossil fuel industry people no longer see themselves as better than nuclear or immune to downturns like those stupid nuclear people who let themselves get bossed around and beaten. I think that there's a lot of sides that can converge on nuclear. What that means, along with strong statements from leaders in technology and business saying good things about nuclear, I think it's going to open the talent taps. And by God, I hope we have enough projects for them in the meantime. Part of that community is already being created. Like, there's all these linked WhatsApp groups that we're using to outflank the aging, unenergetic, very well paid anti-nuclear professionals, the guys who are on the news saying every reactor that's touched in combat in Ukraine is going to blow up, turn them off, and kill Ukrainians with blackouts. Like that's the professional anti-nukes. They are getting outflanked, outworked, and outpassioned in a way by us young people already. So that movement started. Anybody interested in being a part of those communities, again, just reach out. They're here, they're ready. We're already seeing entire countries switching to pro-nuclear energy policies through the actions of our little groups of advocates. It's quite wondrous. It's really, really lovely. So every country in the world has something to work for. Anybody interested in being a part of that, jump in. We could use your talents in nuclear energy. The question of, is this a moment? Is this a catalyzing moment? Yeah, for sure, for sure. I think that it was considered a catalyzing moment Friday, or I would say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of last week. Thursday caused everybody to remember why they were terrified of nuclear. As the plant's been operating, and as the Kharkiv device just didn't make the impact that anybody thought it would, and as the mainstream media catches up and they put out stories saying all the workers at Chernobyl are sad and want to go home, it's not a radiation risk, which is true. All of that's true. That is showing that the power of this moment is stronger than the confusion and fear over Ukraine's nuclear plants. What we're also seeing today, the dam started breaking on Belgium. Belgium had one of the most self-sabotaging, bordering on suicidal national energy programs, and I don't use that lightly. They use as much nuclear energy in their mix as Ukraine does. They're two of the top countries in the world at about 50% nuclear. They had a plan that in the next 36 months to convert half of their electricity supply for their country to pure imported natural gas at market prices. I mean, we're talking just absolute implosion of their economy. Throw out any of the carbon goals. That's not even an issue, right? Well, the green energy minister, who actually worked in a law office that was representing Gazprom while she was in parliament, she has started to crack on nuclear, and she only has a few weeks to find a way to get extra gas plants approved, or she'll have to backtrack on some of the nuclear reactors. That's wild. We already heard about Germany last week. A number of our movement are working very hard to interview executives in Germany and people who will talk, not on record, but they'll talk to us about what exactly is required to fix up those reactors. And honestly, they're better. It's a better situation than we thought. It's only bureaucracy in the way, not technology or human strength in the plants or anything like that. This moment we're ready to capture. And so I love the question. We're going to find ways to get the word out that there's only one thing that combines energy security, long-term low energy cost, and low carbon. But again, now I don't sound as objective. I sound a bit like a booster. Let me just leave that with the phrase that people are now understanding. And I made it up almost like a riddle, like an energy con, just to like get people to think a little deeper about why we're believing in nuclear. It's this: nuclear energy is an expensive way to make cheap electricity. Renewables are a cheap way to make expensive electricity, and that's what we're discovering now. As that's discovered, some of my incredibly talented friends who were working in wind until they switched to solar, and solar until they switched to batteries, and batteries until they switched to like combined systems, and now they're like, what do we go to next? I know some of them are going to find their way to nuclear. Then we have to overcome our inability to build big projects. And I don't know what it means. Like, to go back to the Russian scientists helping or not helping their government or coming to the West, I don't know if I would wish on my worst enemy having to go from building nuclear reactors all over the world the Russian way, where they just build them and they're really good, to America, where we have all these countries begging us to provide nuclear for them. We have the capital, we supposedly have the technologies, and we still can't get our act together and just offer a deal. That's what we have. We've got to get over that inability to do a deal. I love that you mentioned Canada, because Canada got in a lot of hot water for proliferation. Yes, they have a reactor type that is somewhat descended from the earliest reactors used to make plutonium at scale. It only takes a little hint of that in an anti-nuclear world to get your reactors killed off. I think CANDUs will make a comeback. SNC-Lavalin, the maker of CANDUs, is back in the game, and it's one of the only types of reactors that's not bottlenecked by the ultra-heavy forges that you need. On Jason Calacanis's podcast today, one of the projects I'm working on here in Chicago is a group that intends to put a fuel in CANDUs that doesn't create plutonium. And as long as you can do that in a way that doesn't insult the customer, as long as you do that in a way that adds value to the project instead of subtracting it. America has this bad thing where they keep punishing countries that want to do business with America by putting extra proliferation controls. Russia doesn't do that, right? It's part of what makes, some of their statements on Ukraine a little ironic, because Russia is just not that head up about the whole proliferation thing as America is. It doesn't mean they've caused proliferation. It's just they're not that worried. If we can do something to make administrators in powerful countries feel a little better about the proliferation issue, I think that we're going to make big strides in this next.
Yeah, I believe.
Thank you.
We see the results nowadays in Ukraine.
All
but
right.
yeah,
Well, if anybody has maybe one more question, then I should probably hop off.
I believe all source.
Oh, Lisa?
Oh, it's not directed to Mark.
So who has a question for Mark?
Lisa, maybe?
Lisa, I believe, yeah.
Hi, I do. Let me just get my thoughts together. I just to go back on the how to support nuclear. That was asked to Mark, and I really appreciate your long response, Mark. It was very facilitated in maybe through analogies or things like that to people that do not have any scientific background whatsoever. That said, I think that something's understated that's so overtly obvious is just to stop catastrophizing the safety of it, because at one point there was a lot of issues with safety and concerns for obvious reasons. We see what can happen, but we learn from that, and then we reinforce and we make it better, and the engineers do a better job, and they needs to be like an ascertainable risk. It needs to be not just coming out of one's tush. And I think it just it tears away at the core of what science is in and of itself. And I know several of people that would, scientists, engineers, structural engineers, that would probably buy me a drink right now. And as it relates to proliferation, I think that there's, again, an obvious thing that is not being addressed enough, is that there's a huge difference between nuclear energy and harvesting that and utilizing that, and the development of nuclear weaponry. there, obviously, you know, if you want to get into the science and the details of that, talk to Mark. It's just different, and I think it gets muddied, and it becomes a talking point when it doesn't have to be. There's concerns, and those concerns are dressed at the core of the security and the engineering and all of that. That's just my 2 cents.
Hey, I appreciate that, and I know that was a slightly more a comment than a question, which is okay. I think what I would say to just close this off for the night, I want to offer you guys a novel way to think about nuclear risks and nuclear plant risks as opposed to other risks. And this I borrowed from Nassim Taleb. He was really freaked out by Fukushima, and his book, I think it was Black Swan, is filled with attacks on the thinking and preparedness and internal attitude of the Japanese nuclear industry, which is understandable. He's come to a much more nuanced opinion over the last 10 years, just me watching him on Twitter. He makes this point: nuclear accidents are not multiplying risks. That is to say, one nuclear plant having a problem is infinitely unlikely to cause other nuclear plants to have a problem. In fact, it's the opposite. One nuclear plant having a problem can fix an entire class of potential accidents all over the world at other nuclear plants. We saw that with 3 Mile Island. We saw that with Fukushima. And dare I say it, considering that there's a lot of the Chernobyl type reactors still in operation in Russia, we haven't had any serious incidences since Chernobyl. Not that that's like a great endorsement of the RBMK, but it's still operating, right? So what I would say is nuclear is in the case of an accident, something that strengthens all the other nuclear plants, and that radiation that's out in the environment is not a multiplying hazard. It does not expand itself and make copies of itself like a virus or a biological agent. One of the ways that fear was spread using certain scenes in the Chernobyl TV show was to imply that you could like you could have one person kind of like contaminate severely another person. They attempted to make it almost like a virus, almost like a zombie movie, you know, health effects in one person transferring to another. It's just not particularly plausible, even in that case. And it's something that wouldn't happen from a nuclear plant accident. I don't think there's any comfort to the dispossessed of Fukushima Prefecture to know that they were never in health risk. So we have to take that seriously. That's the responsible of the nuclear industry. However, I think that a very large percentage of the cost of Fukushima Daiichi accident and the trauma was inflicted by the outside world, not the plant. I still meet savage, careless people who intend to scare and terrify people about nuclear, when in the end, that's the main malign power of nuclear plants, is not the meltdown. If 3 units melted at Zaporizhia, it'd be contained in the massive, incredibly strong containments, right? It's just that's why it's a containment. The Fukushima Daiichi reactors didn't even have containment; they had confinement, right? Anyway, to sum it up, you can think of nuclear as a different category of risk from things like viruses, and that's not that comforting in time of COVID, but at least that can help people know that in nuclear, if you have a problem, it strengthens nuclear; it does not weaken it.
Mark, do you have a moment? I'd just like to ask you what your thoughts on the Sprott Uranium Trust in Canada is, and
Sure.
Cameco, actually. The Cameco, the biggest uranium mine in Canada. What's your thoughts on how that whole situation is going to move forward?
So Sprott, for everybody listening, now, first of all, I don't invest. I know lovely Cameco people. I don't invest in uranium. As I started to get way too close to the nuclear industry, I dropped any financial investment. I just don't. It's not worth it to me, because I think my goal here is to be as neutral and as trusted as possible. And I think being a uranium investor, as fun and as cool as that would be, gets in the way of that. So I love the uranium investor community. They like my tweets and they retweet me. That's great. So for everyone out there, Sprott is an asset manager. They've made SPUT, that's the Sprott Physical Uranium Trust. What they saw is that uranium was at too low a price to support mining, and yet somehow you had to mine it in order to get like nuclear fuel. Uranium is weird in that you need almost none of it to power the entire global nuclear industry. You just don't need that much. You need like, I think I ran the numbers, something like 1/100th of the value of uranium is like compared to like global gold mining or something. It's some crazy number. And that's how powerful nuclear is. But that makes for very weird market dynamics in uranium since it's storable and you only need a little bit and it's so easy to transport and it's so compact, right? It's just an easy fuel. It's in that way the opposite of natural gas, or even worse, like electricity as a thing to have to store is a nightmare. It's an absolute savage nightmare. Uranium's the easiest thing to store. So what Sprott did is they're like, well, let's speed up the end of this silly season where uranium costs too little to support mines, and yet we know long into the future this number of reactors keep needing this amount of uranium. So they started buying it up and buying it up and buying it up to like wind up all the slack in the market, like a big cable, just wind it up. And so everyone who wants more than that can definitely go look at it. The uranium market is incredibly weird because there are interactions with big state actors like Rosatom. One of the concerns about Ukraine for America is that America gets a bunch of its enrichment services and fuel conversion services from Russia right now. And American companies are asking and requesting from Congress, please don't block the uranium. Just don't mess with that. It's not worth it. It doesn't matter to them financially. It matters to us in terms of our refueling schedule. What Sprott is trying to do is get the time period where the price of uranium matches the actual cost of production. Cameco, I think they like this because they think that they have a very low cost mine and that if the cost goes up, they'll be in a very good position. I think that's most of what people would want to hear from me about that issue.
Thank you, Mark.
Yes, thank you very much. Very succinct.
Can I,
And
you know
thanks
what?
for
Yeah, just quick remark. What's my fear? You know, someone called me here in Northern America. I'm here for 20 years. Doctors, when they know my history, they know that I'm from 80 kilometers from Chernobyl originally. They call me Chernobyl kid. Anyway, yeah, but no. At first I was shocked, but then I realized it's all kind of just
Okay.
you know. Yeah, they found some traces of inflammation in my steroids, but they say there is no need for surgery, so I'm fine. I hope. My
You should be
fear,
good.
yeah, my fear, Mark, that those scientists from Ukraine bombarded today and with destroyed equipment, they will just have to move from Ukraine, and Ukraine will become even more marginalized country. This is my fear toward nuclear technologies, because I believe in nuclear technologies. I think it's great. I think it's green, and I think Ukraine had a good future and still has to have a good future in this nuclear technology. And we have to do everything to restore nuclear capacity of Ukraine, destroyed now by the villains, and punish the scientific community of Russia, which are
plant operators were not injured or disrupted from their tasks. They've kept the plant running. The resolution, may it be peaceful. We're all hoping it's peaceful and it's secure, and leaves a brilliant Zaporizhia ready to keep cranking into the future. I think that nuclear has proven itself worthy of hard times during this battle. And I think Ukrainians must be so proud of what they've accomplished with their fleet.
Mark, what about Kharkiv, bombarded now and destroyed equipment? Who will restore this equipment for the local
US,
community?
Look, you could crowdfund for this thing. It'll be a few million.
Oh, really? Okay, so it's not so. Oh, because I had the impression it's very sophisticated and unique.
No. Think about it, guys. It's only about 6 kilograms.
I see a lot more hands up here, so
Can I just
maybe
interject real
someone
quick,
else.
if possible? I was just talking to Mark prior because a few decades ago, I have the date here somewhere. I think one of the reasons why people think that the funding was so significant, and Mark had advised that it would be, relatively affordable to with crowdfunding, etc. Was one of the large parts of the reason why it was funding the research facility, in which I'm being specific about, is that a lot of the enriched uranium for the licensure of the facility. So that's just something to put out there. So that's it. I'm sorry, and I'm done.
No, it's okay. No, I missed little bits of that, but I think I heard. If I
I'll
interpreted
be
correctly,
back in
I
a
will
few.
say that the U.S.
Peepee
has been
time.
pretty much useless in helping build nuclear for countries over the past like two decades or so, but we've been really good at taking all of the higher enriched uranium test reactors and subcritical accelerator driven assemblies like this, and we've converted it all down. So whoever's involved in that with like Department of Energy and Department of State, they've done a great job. It's just not left anybody with any power plants. I was in Ghana in early November, and they showed with great pride their nuclear test reactor, which had this process too, getting subbed out for lower enriched uranium, and there was a plaque on the wall saying, "Hey, USA, Ghana got rid of this high enriched uranium." And there are weird stories with American provided reactors with high enriched uranium. Taiwan was pretty far along in making its own nuclear weapon.
Mr. Nelson, might I interrupt you?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. I find that all of you, what you are saying, really interesting. But I think we have some questions about Ukraine and uranium.
Oh, of course. My apologies.
And I want to get others on the speakers row. So all sources, Austin, Engo, whoever wants to go first.
Go ahead, Austin. You just joined us, so you go ahead.
I appreciate it. So actually, funnily enough, my question was actually also focused on nuclear technology and things like that. And if we want to, reorient the conversation back towards the situation in Ukraine, do reactors myself, and also as a former uranium enrichment on the one hand, and number two, I would also love to hear your opinions regarding sort of the continued effort and progress regarding the production of fusion-based energy. Now, I'm definitely willing to table that for a later conversation should we want to continue to reorient on Ukraine.
I have to be honest, I find that topic that interesting that I want to join a separate space for that, actually.
Sure, just send me time and date, and I'll be there.
Sounds like a plan.
So
sounds like a plan.
Mark, I'm following you. Maybe you should be the host, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had like 3 or 4 more people which were supporting Mark during the conversation that we had when the Russian troops attacked the administration building near Zaporizhia. So we can bring them in as well. But so far, again, thank you, Mark, for your contribution, for your knowledge, and for stepping in and providing your expertise regarding the current situation in Kharkiv and that particular reactor, because there was some disinformation already brewing and simmering.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I'll jump off here. You guys can get a hold of me on DMs. I've gotten a lot in. I mean, it's my fault. I asked for them. I'll go through and answer them over the next 24 hours or so.
Thank you, Mark.
See
Yep.
you.
See you guys. Is in this idea, this notion that Russian offensive is stalling, is starting to get more traction through, at least in what we would consider, and I like the term, but what we would consider the mainstream media, right? Our normal news. Again, a lot of their offensive operations kind of are stalled, right? And so, we get this report about Kyiv. It doesn't look like the numbers that they're sending right now into Kyiv are very high. It's certainly not enough to encircle, and certainly not enough to seize the capital. And so I just wanted to bring that comment up because, we've talked about it in this space with the listeners, a lot of the military guys, that we were kind of surprised at Russian performance, but maybe they're gonna pivot, maybe not. And there's just a lot of indications that I think Russia has hit a roadblock, and it's going to be what we're going to have to see is, Intel Hub always says it before, the decision point, right? And what is the next step for the Russian campaign in Ukraine? Because we're not seeing, the main city that they captured, the main big city, Kherson. We've not seen even Mariupol still fought. They're still holding a fight. So I just wanted to bring that up, that, this is starting to get a lot more traction. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I see Ango for a long time. I don't know.
Yes. So I wanted to ask you, so we're starting to see this fascist movement, I would guess it would be called, in in Russia. With this, we're seeing the of children, the mass amounts of propaganda. Your country was able to purge itself.
Haven't been. The reality is that since the end of the war, Germany is full of Nazis, and nowadays even children of Nazis who are Nazis, and the denazification that is actually a word of from the history of my country, which was meant really seriously, but never got finished. So I would sadly resent the statement that we got over our past in that way, but also we apparently that holds things together. and movement again. And I have to say it worked pretty well. German constitution, where the Russians wanted to
It's fine because we touched both. Back to it. For now, again, um, that they still keep amassing forces around Kyiv, both northwest of Kyiv and also northeast, as well as at the south. So I'm just kind of puzzled here whether this would be enough to perpetrate the encirclement of Kyiv, or actually would this be enough to penetrate into residential areas of Kyiv and kind of get anything out of it, or it's just more of a stalled offensive at this point? Because the situation that currently is, it definitely does not suit Ukraine, even in the worst case, not in the worst case scenario, but still in the best case scenario, if the gains get solidified, if the gains of Russian invaders get solidified, it's a very bad situation for Ukraine. The attained or reached something that they wanted for so long, this sort of land corridor to Crimea. So again, the question is whether the advance stalled, and what does that entail, and also whether it is a fact or it's just speculative at this point. So Wolverine and all sources.
I mean, it could very well could be stalled just because of the fact of when you look at weather conditions, the terrain that they're going to have to go through, the issues that they've been having with fuel, munitions, just regular supplies, and obviously the morale of the troops. That definitely could be, one of the things that could happen. The other thing is that they could be amassing troops for some type of, I wouldn't say per se, probably a encirclement, because if they are those units that are on the northeast, if they're across the river, well, they're going to have to do a crossing with military bridging equipment, possibly, as I don't know how many bridges are left standing across the river. But if they do, that's going to be a nightmare for them. With everything going on, and even if they do get into the city, the advantage is not going to be with the units, because you got to look at the size of Kyiv. If they've got 2 million residents, I mean, all those buildings, those are the best places to sit and fire anti-armor weapons down on top of vehicles, because that's the most vulnerable. And the amount of ambushes they can set up. I mean, they may get units in there, but they're not going to last long at all. I mean, you could literally see whole columns and whole units just literally wiped out and destroyed, sitting in the streets of Kiev.
Thanks. All sources.
Yeah, so to Wolverine's point, right? An encirclement requires a lot more forces than what currently Russia probably even has just in total for the invasion, especially for a city the size of Kiev. So, I think if they're trying to go into Kiev, I don't think they have the force flow right now to support that. One, Cherniv is still resisting, right? Cherniv has not fallen, so that consumes combat power. Yes, they're advancing through the east of Kiev, but their supply lines are very thin. Their offensive operations and kind of the areas they control are very thin, very prone to counterattacks. We've talked about that a lot. But another thing that I think is very important that we need to highlight is the vast majority, right? So, what we talk about and we reference, urban combat, right? Clearly in the main city right now, probably Kherson, we have they're probably all located more than likely in Kiev because that's the center, that's the capital that has a very huge geographical importance. Except for Kherson, the Russians have not been engaged in urban combat in this conflict. And why does that matter? Killed in action. How brutal. Those amount of casualties in a couple. Maybe Russia can just say, "Oh, we got our land bridge to Crimea. We're succeeded. Ceasefire." Game, right? When you're planning military operations, a lot of times it is a numbers game. It's going to be a slaughter. They're going to suffer significantly amount. More casualties, and they lost thousands of soldiers without any, if you think
speculating about the first serious attack on Odessa. So I think it's just to destroy.
So all source, why wouldn't, if they're so at such a disadvantage in Kiev?
ways, and that's not, I don't think that's what that, me personally, I don't think that's kind of within the realm of possibility for them to do that.
Okay,
but
let's like I can admit it. Let's go for the most dangerous core. Come on. Yeah. I'm just, I have
certainty, right? One, I always go back to, just as we're monitoring their tactical nuclear weapons and their strategic nuclear weapons, U.S. in Kyiv. Yeah, there's a in military terms.
now with the weapon that they have, what kind of effect it might have for the other lands? Because basically hypothetical.
If you're using, there's two types of chemical weapons. There's persistent and non-persistent, right? So your persistent is those chemical agents that stay around. depending on the chemical agent that they use, they can stay for a very long time or not, right? A duration. But basically, you would launch a persistent chemical attack against an area if you wanted, in tactical terms, right? If you're talking about military, in the U.S. Army, in the military, and the Marines, we all study this, right? If you launch persistent chemical agents, your objective is to basically ensure that that area is no longer available for military operations. You basically negated any forces because the moment you go in, you're contaminated. Non-persistent chemical agent, which is something what we saw, for example, more. And so the Syrian regime, in Syria, used a lot of non-persistent chemical agent. Non-persistent chemical agent is employed. It can poison or kill people, and then it quickly dissipates through the air. To analyze every single chemical agent and then understanding, but
chemical weapons. We are still wondering whether they're going to find money to do that, since the ruble is pretty much like trash. but
Also,
still.
would it be safe to say also you want to showcase some sense of escalation, though, right?
Yes, yeah. So it goes back to the conversation of Russia utilizing nuclear weapons. And I
Also,
understand people are going to use this. Yep, go ahead.
how would you classify what you're seeing from now, politically, historically, economically, everything that's going on today?
Who is speaking? Because I can't see. There's a glitch on my.
Luckily, listen.
Okay, yeah.
And I
Hi.
want to tell you, Fairlane, I am originally from Czechoslovakia. I grew up in communism. I know what this is like. I know what you could be possibly losing if Russia was to take over your country. I don't wish
Okay,
that for you.
Lucky, your
I just want
question.
to say that. I mentioned my
Your
question.
question
Please,
is
you heard my
is
question,
a
but
is a
I
hard
need to
one. All
explain to
sources.
Fairlane who I
Please go
am
ahead.
because she spoke the other day, and I feel for her. I understand.
Yeah. Thank you.
Some of the
I just
fears
there was a
that
glitch
she
on my
also
phone and I
has
wasn't
when it
able
comes
to
to
see.
Much appreciated.
communication. We're gonna block the communication with Russia now. All the democratic, media is not gonna go through and all this because they're blocking us. I feel for you. I hear you, and I want to tell you, back in the day, 1989, all we had was loving people from Western Europe and America bringing books, smuggling books in vans, and then Radio Free Europe. That was it. We had nothing else. There was no internet then, right?
Awesome.
Yeah,
Awesome.
absolutely. I agree. Absolutely. But the problem is not in us. The problem is in Russia. They want to isolate their people. They want to keep the lid shut. They break down the communication. They cut the cord. So again, it's like it's hard to get around it if their own regime just wants to get them under complete control. So it's at this point it's up to them to get something to get around it and actually raise themselves and do something finally about it. And unfortunately, I don't see that happening right now. Sorry
Yeah,
for that.
me neither. So, all sources you want to reply?
Walter,
No, I mean,
Walter, I know this. I am explaining to you from the situation my country was in back in the day. And I'm telling you, if it wasn't for other people coming in with the information, I didn't even know what information to ask for. I would have been just as brainwashed as the Russian people are being brainwashed by their TV and pro-Russian propaganda are today. That's what I'm trying to tell you. I am not telling you you're stopping them. I'm telling you the Russian government is preventing them from hearing the truth, right?
Now,
so we have to do everything we can to bring the information through. How we gonna do it, I don't know, but we have to do it.
My counter argument to what you said, which is absolutely correct, but so far for 30 years they weren't isolated whatsoever. Quite the opposite. They had all the means of communication to assess where it is going to. All the means of communication. They had, everything that we have here in the United States, in Europe, in the UK, whenever you are, Russians had it. And they have seen where this is coming to. And they, remained silent. Overwhelming majority of them. They were happy with what was happening. And now, unfortunately, we, Ukrainians, are reaping the results of Russian complacency. And on top of that, it's not just complacency of their, pro-democratic part. It's the absolute, brainwashed stance and absolute warmongering stance over the overwhelming majority of Russians. So again, yes, you're correct. We should keep, the line of communications with Russia, but in the first place, it is the Russian government that keeps the lid shut. And on top of that, we had 30 years of open, communications with them. And instead, what happened? They brought this into existence. They were complicit. They were supportive of this. Yes, with exemptions. But again, overwhelming majority of them were, despite the understanding of what is happening, because again, they had all the means of communications with us, everything else.
Cats.
They still were happy with what was happening. Supportive,
hopefully the audio is not choppy.
Pardon. And we are reaping the result. Ukrainian people are reaping the result of this right now. Are there is the subject of this Russian situation.
I have to completely agree with Walter. There's a reason why the Russian majority is like what you described, but it doesn't change the fact that it is what it is. And the fact that there is a government campaign in Russia right now to dress up young people and to finally make them ready for total war is very reminiscent of what I learned about my people in Germany 70 odd years ago. So I don't think there's any hope of changing Russian regime and government. There's only hope of ending the war by supporting Ukraine.
So if I may with Luki's question, I think from the communication aspect from the U.S. and NATO and Russia and NATO and all that, because we kind of get this question because it kind of feeds into this concern that people have, like, oh my God, there's breakdowns in communication, escalation is ripe, there can be a lot of conflict. And Lucky, I'm going to use the example you just said that you're from Czechoslovakia and then the Spring of Prague and then what happened in Hungary as well, right? Unfortunately, this is not uncharted territory between Western and Russian, back then Soviet relations, right? We've been in these situations before where we've seen this type of environment, where we've seen this. The reports came out from Politico that, the Pentagon and the Ministry of Defense do have a direct line. obviously the amount of communication is less than it was in the past. However, one thing to keep in note, even though we're expelling diplomats, we still have an embassy open in Moscow, a U.S. embassy in Moscow, and the Russian embassy is still open in D.C. So there's still lines of communication. If we kind of want to broaden this out, yes, the Russian government is clearly an authoritarian dictatorship, right? And maybe for another podcast we can talk, the type it is, and how the people in Russia might be able to go against it or whatever it may be, right? And that's something we can obviously park for a different day. But from the grander geopolitical aspect, there is still lines of communication between the West and Russia. And let's not forget, currently, US, Russian, China, UK, France, and Germany are in negotiations of the JCPOA negotiations with Iran. So you do have American diplomats and Russian diplomats still coordinating about a completely separate issue. That matters because when people are concerned about a risk and miscalculation, this can expand to a broader war. That's why we have diplomats. That is the whole
Just
purpose
to
of existence.
clarify, Russia didn't stop those negotiations about Iran. Didn't
But
they?
No, but that's what I'm saying.
outsource, I
They're
think this
still
problem
going
is
on.
way
Yeah.
bigger.
Yeah,
And
that's
when
awesome. That's really a thing.
when
I
I
think.
said breakdown in communication, okay, I'm sorry, I probably chose the poor choice of words. It's mostly the political, the newspaper, the media, and all this messaging that's coming to the public, because the public tends to react to whatever they see in the media, right? But we cannot omit the fact that at a certain point in a certain time of the US capitalism, the shareholders decided it would be way cheaper, to be manufacturing things in China, which had led to the rise of China, bringing people out of poverty and everything else. That's absolutely amazing and great and whatever. But also, currently, China is about to become the superpower, has also created super
Lucky.
ties. No, please.
Fine.
This is important though.
Yeah, I know this is important, but we are like trying to stay on point, and instead we are just derailing into China and whatnot. So, Lucky, if you can keep your comment towards the situation in Ukraine and Russian invasion of Ukraine, that would be highly appreciated. If not,
So
leave it for later.
yeah, and Walter, and I agree with your comment, and I think, and we get this a lot from China, and I think, when this is all over, I would gladly have a space for all our listeners who want to talk about this, because and I'm not going to go into detail, I fundamentally disagree with that assessment. But that's not for a conversation for now. This is about Russia, Ukraine. That's where the priority is. I will glad to have one. We can host this in the future about China, and I will gladly point out why I fundamentally disagree that China is somehow a winner, a superpower.
That wasn't me. The sound just went boom. Goodbye. Let's see if it catches up.
But as Walter says, I think that is very important that we park this issue.
No, it isn't. I lied. It'll probably pop in and out and then settle down. Hopefully. This room is open though. If you guys want to join, then we don't have to listen to the background. We can actually talk amongst ourselves. Think about it. Yeah, there's so many ways this could go. It's almost impossible. If you could place a bet on how this will end up and be correct, you could probably be the richest person in the world if you risked enough money.
Expert. So if you
see, in and out. Well, let's just see if it'll settle down.
Crime they probably committed. These vatniks Side today, forgotten by the government, they survive as soldiers of fortune. If you have a problem, if no one else is stupid enough, and you can find them, maybe you can hire the Z team.
Yeah, thank you for bringing some levity
What
to
the
this.
fuck is that
But
about?
we still have all source news, and maybe Ryan can ask all source news a question, and we'll stick on point, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, no, thanks, Walter. And just before I ask all source, just a point. I mean, I agree with Walter. We were talking about this yesterday. There's a level of responsibility on the Russian people for what's going on. So I'll leave it at that. All source. I've today I've spent several hours on two things. One is aircraft, studying capabilities of aircraft, and particularly the MiGs and the SUs, the Su-34s, and I'm just wondering what your take is on these MiGs that are coming in from Poland, and how they could be a strategic advantage for Ukraine, and particularly around stealth.
The Air Force that is being talked about, the platform that's going to be trying to give to Ukraine from the Eastern European countries. So from a military point of view, what I would say is, yes, it helps. Don't get me wrong. Any assistance is useful to the Ukrainians, especially.
I'm just getting some a number for Philippines. Maybe trade. You can phone in instead of having to press a link.
Russians, with the current assets that they have ensured that the Russians don't have air superiority over their territory. The aircrafts that they're using, what they're now looking like, what they're transitioning to is kind of just bombing cities, right? What I would say though is that the majority of the threat from this idea, right? So what's obviously the objective on the ground, right? 1, encircle a city. 2, bomb it. 3, send ground forces. But the bombing aspect of it, what I'm seeing more and what I think is the greatest threat, is not necessarily from their Air Force, but more from their artillery and their MLRS systems, right? So yes, aircrafts are very helpful to maintain their superiority. It's more designed for that purpose. It does have some multi-role. It can do air to ground, so you can empower it to do precision strikes air to ground. But if you were to ask me where I think we should prioritize military defense, the thing is, aircrafts are sexy, they're nice, they're cool. Where I would prioritize more is, because the Ukrainians actually appear have done it successfully in Melitopol yesterday, or like 36 hours ago, is against the D-30, the 2 batteries, 1 to 2 batteries of D-30s. D-30s, for our listeners, they're artillery systems. They're fixed. They have some 2 wheels, but they're not self-propelled. You have to tow it in place, it, fire it, and then tow it again. Those, it looks like the Ukrainians managed to destroy that utilizing counter-fire battery. And so where I would prioritize defense more is on counter-fire battery radars, your QA-37s, your QA-36, your QA-50s, right? Those systems, it looks like the Ukrainians, because my concern before this, kind of a couple of weeks, like last week or a couple of days ago, was like, oh, those are very, you have to emplace them, they have high maintenance, they're kind of easy targets to detect, because the moment they emit, because they have electronic signature, once you turn it on, the Russians can target and destroy it. Since the Russians are not doing that, then, hey, give it to the Ukrainians with self-propelled artillery to conduct counter-fire batteries. You can then emplace your artillery around key areas. The moment that Russians launch theirs, you immediately retaliate and destroy them. So that's kind of where, yes, the MiG-29s can obviously have a huge impact, but they're more for air superiority rather than, I think, what I'd see in the ground. The biggest threat is artillery. And then the second question is, you said, was it stealth related to the MiG-29? I just want to make sure I understood that question.
Yeah, because NATO, like NATO spec aircraft, there's a certain level of stealth that's there. So when we talk about upgrades to those MiGs over time, I know part of what we're talking about is stealth capabilities, which the Americans, they I think they have unmatched stealth capabilities on their fleet. I know the Russians have struggled with their long-range bombers in terms of stealth. So, in order to avoid radar, you have a choice. You launch stealthy planes, and if you don't have, or you fly low. Now, if you fly low, you're going to be subject to, surface-to-air anti-aircraft missiles. But my question is around, I think for the Ukrainians to make use of these planes, they're going to have to have some pretty good stealth. But what I've also seen is the Ukrainian defense has been pretty adept at taking out, the Buk systems. So yeah, it's more, the question is more around, stealth capability of the Russian aircraft and stealth capability of the Ukrainian aircraft and what they're taking receipt of. Because I think that's an important topic.
Yeah, so I'm not I'm familiar with enemy air platforms and air forces, but my understanding is that MiG-29s are not stealth capable. They were not designed for stealth capable. And to your point, a lot of the stealth capabilities are mostly with the U.S. And then you have the F-35s, the F-22s, the F-117, the B-2 bombers, etc. Now all these sixth-generation aircraft. The old Soviet models do not have stealth capabilities. What the Russians have attempted to do is their fifth-generation fighter, kind of responding to the F-22 and the F-35, is a PAC-50. We haven't seen that many in use. Most of them are probably still in development phase, and that's one thing that what the Russians are very good at. They're very good at building something that looks amazing, has all these capabilities, and then they test it out and it looks amazing, and then they can't mass produce it because they're too expensive or it's just not feasible, right? I can build a tank that is the best tank in the world, but if it costs me $1 billion+, it's not useful to the Army or to the Marine Corps, right? So the MiG-29s do not have stealth capabilities, and what we're looking at this war, it does not look like stealth is a major factor in it. And to your point about the Buk systems and a lot of the Russian air defense, the SHORAD systems, I mean, the greatest enemy that we're seeing, and we've seen this even in the past, is not only in this conflict. I mean, the Turkish TB2. I mean, the TB2 has just been a phenomenal drone capable of easily handling Russian air defense systems. And I think, you know what, instead of giving them a $1 billion plane like the F-35, just give them TB2s. They can wreak havoc on the Russian air defense systems with TB2.
That's what they're getting, apparently. Mark, Peter, and Wolverine.
Hey, thanks for this. Well, I just want to add to the previous conversation about the types of weapons that Putin might use or not. I guess wanted to remind about the way he got to power in 1999. There were a series of bombings of civilian buildings in
Oh, we're back. Well, I thought we were back, and now we're not back. Looks like we're going through another little glitch. It seems to come in kind of waves, where they let you have a half a sentence, and then you wait 30 seconds, and you get another half a sentence, and then boom, they carry on. there's enough people that want to just carry the talk on within ourselves and through YouTube, then let me know. Well, this room is open, so the first person who joins is the trigger to switch off the stream that is lagging. Okay.
You know, no one seriously questioned him, and he became. So yeah, I just basically wanted to remind of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peter?
Yeah, Putin has always remained, in terms of like polling of the Russian population, you know, again, you always have to take polls with a grain of salt, but he's never polled less than a majority of approval. Like his lowest was in April of 2020, based upon the failure of Russia to deal with the COVID crisis. His popularity dropped to 59%, which is a rate that many American presidents would see as a, you know, an overwhelming success. His approval ratings, you know, when he invaded Crimea and he supported these so-called breakaway Donbass republics in 2014, his approval rating skyrocketed to 80% and more, right? And he has not been losing approval, at least as far as like since 2021 to now. His approval rating is back up to 71% just in the run-up to this war. So now again, is this official? Is this real? Can you poke holes in these polls? Maybe, but I would want to classify the Russian populace as to basically fall into to a couple of categories. There's the old people that, you know, again, we call Gen X or Boomers or whatever. The people old enough to remember life under the Soviet Union. There is a lot of nostalgia that things were better at that time. You know, and so those older generations, they watch state-sponsored media. They're pretty much, you know, watching television or radio, and they're kind of a captured crowd. So that's the older generations that are the pro-Putinists. The younger generation are, again, he's made his society very heteronormative, very macho, very, you know, the VDV kind of machismo is definitely an example of that, hypermasculinity. And so the younger generations that also support Putin have this kind of like, they don't remember the Soviet Union, but they appreciate how Russia has been strong, you know, this whole projection of strength. And, you know, so that's the younger generation that support him. There are a lot of people that don't support him, right? So anywhere between a quarter to maybe a third of Russia does not support him. And then there's also a number of people that are just really quiet. Maybe they you know support him in the good times, maybe they don't support him in the bad times, but they're just really kind of, you know, again, when we're hearing about that kind of Czech experience in the past, you know, that's the kind of thing where like you just keep your head down, you don't say anything, you don't want to be targeted, you know, you just go along, get along. And so those are kind of like the four demographics that are going on in Russia now. You know, obviously we would want the, you know, the cosmopolitans, like, you know, again, this young generation that see themselves more aligned with the West. You know, there are a lot of tech workers there, a lot of intellectuals, you know, and they are horrified. They're the ones that are marching. They're the ones that are protesting. But that population is not the majority, will not be the majority, given the way you know, Russia media has shaped the, you know, the gestalt, you know, the whole just the whole zeitgeist of what's going on in Russia. They have this myth of Russia, you know, resuming greatness, very much how Donald Trump wanted to make America great again. Putin has wanted to make Russia great again. And so they're kind of using that, you know, that whole nationalist myth, you know. But again, there's a lot of people that think it's hogwash, but they are not the majority. And it's very dangerous for us as Americans to ask for them to rise up when they can be put down brutally. You know, and again, I just caution people about that.
And to address that, I think it's not prudent for us to say to the Russian people that they have to rise up. We in the West have on a political level for so long have endured Putin and have opened doors and floors for his lackeys. So we don't get to demand of the Russian people to rise up in their situation. That's one thing, and the second thing, I completely agree with you. It won't happen in this constellation. Even if there is not a majority for active supporters of Putin, there's always a majority of good Germans, as we call them. And those are the silents. Those are the ones who are arranging themselves with the system. And so the ones on the marketplaces right now, I don't know if they are cosmopolitans or just fed up youth in general. They are, in the end, not powerful enough to overthrow a dictatorship right now in that situation. That's my opinion.
Thanks. And something very important, I think it should be corrected. There were no breakaway republics whatsoever. They were framed as breakaway republics by Russian propaganda and Russian disinformation. Essentially, no one in Donetsk or Luhansk wanted to start a war or just became a separate, entity whatsoever. What Russia did, Russia implanted special forces, implanted mercenaries that started the war. Then Russia moved in with battalion tactical groups, and essentially Russia created this Russian occupational administration in eastern Ukraine, and called it or framed it as if it was some kind of a breakaway republic, which was just preposterous. And unfortunately for everyone, because of Russian influence, Russian money, and Russian ties, even the reputable media in the West, they went along with this Russian disinformation BS. But this is BS, we should remember that. And we should remember that it's basically Russian occupation administration. At this point, it's kind of ridiculous even just to drop it. I believe, Peter, it's just inadvertently happens. Because again, all the Western media or big Western media, they fell along with this, narrative that was fomented by Russian disinformation.
I want to, Walter, if I may, I want to drop a certain podcast I'm finding really, really informative on a long-term development of the situation we are in right now. It's Gaslit Nation. It's made by Sarah Kendzior, and Andrea Chalupa, which is the sister of Alexandra Chalupa, which you might have heard.
Sorry, not on my end. It'll come through.
Experts, journalists on especially Ukraine, and to listen what they have to say. They are saying for the situation right now, and I more and more tend to believe in their assessment that there is no hope for not going into war with Russia as NATO, because Russia won't stop. Putin is going to live for a long time, and Russia is going full fascist, and they won't stop, and they will threaten the Western world and the whole world with everything they have, despite Ukraine or not. And in the end, we will have a situation where we have to, as NATO, where we have to get in there despite the risks. and that's what I'm trying to assess those days. What are the risks really? That's why I'm referring to the satellite guy I posted earlier, and what are our capabilities, because I strongly believe that in the end, without real active NATO involvement, it won't go away. We won't solve this problem.
Walter, because I know I got one of the listeners, and he specifically DM'd me asking for a question for me before I head out, if it's okay. So I know Live Geopolitic Tensions had a specific question for me. He DM'd me earlier. So Live, if you want to...
He has a mic, so please, Live.
Hi guys. So it's just wondering about, Russia's just weaponization of their energy in general. Like, they recently come out and said that they're going to cut off European gas supplies through Nord Stream 1. Russian oil imports as its, I guess, final option almost in retribution for the invasion that they've done. And you now see that Moscow's come out for the first time hinting that it's ready to use their own energy weapon. After the deputy prime minister, I know I'm probably butchering this name, it's Alexander Novak, if I recall correctly. He said that Russia could take drastic action of cutting natural gas supplies to Germany via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline. And you've already seen that the German government has already come out and said that they don't want to actually go through with a full ban on Russian energy imports, as it will just threaten social cohesion within their countries. I just wanted to get your guys' opinion on that.
So Live, that's a great question. I'm going to refer that to either Martin or actually Chris as well. I know Peter also talks a lot about that. So with that, I'm actually going to sign out then, because that's kind of outside of my area of expertise. I hope everybody has a good night and appreciate it, Walter. I'll see you guys tomorrow.
Bye, all sources.
Thank you, all source. Thank you. I believe Chris is the one to address this in an elaborate way. Chris Alexander.
I'm happy to answer, Walter. Can you just summarize the last part of the question, because it cut out for me?
Yeah, like geopolitical tensions, you can just present a concise option for that question.
Basically, the question is regarding the energy shortages that Russia's now threatening against Western Europe, especially Germany, threatening to cut down Nord Stream 1. How exactly powerful would you say that threat is?
I think it's powerful because the political will in Europe has grown so quickly, and behind the idea of just sanctions, but depriving them of financial oxygen.
Chris, I believe you have a connection problem, or is it just me?
Sounds like it. But until he's back, I can maybe agree with him. It's quite serious. As I follow the German discussion on that, it's I believe in the end Germany will decide the right thing and say fuck off Putin, and will take on the offer of the European Commission for alternative supplies in mostly gas for the rest of the cold season. But it will take some time, and there's a huge discussion within the coalition in Germany about that, especially because it's driving the the Greens to concessions they don't want to make about like running coal plants longer than anticipated because of the energy shortages and stuff like that. So yeah.
I mean, didn't the Minister for Economy, his name is like something Habeck, I think, he said last
Yes.
Thursday, he spoke out against the bans on energy imports from Russia. Like he said something to the effect of, I wouldn't advocate an embargo on Russian imports, and he would oppose it.
Yeah, and he's from the Greens, so you see the dilemma the German coalition is in right now.
Thank you. For Lane, and then Wolverine,
Yeah, guys.
Austin, and Peter.
I'm slightly blacking out, so I'm gonna just add a couple of remarks, maybe ask a couple of questions, and I'm gonna go and take a nap and continue with the day because it's 8 a.m. here. Just one remark as to the phrase I heard, like Putin wants to make Russia great again. Russia has never been great. Russia was an empire. He just wants to bring all the pieces of the empire. That's why he has his peacekeeping thing. It's Stephen Colbert was laughing about it. He's bringing peacemakers to all the to bring back all the pieces of the land that he sort of lost, which is delusional. And about MiGs and BT2s, Bayraktars, I'm pretty much in touch all the time with the air forces of Ukraine, and I know that in some of the countries, in some of the armed forces, UAVs are part of the artillery units. By default, in our case, it's part of the air defense forces. It's called Raketno-Zenitny Vійська. It's rocket and missiles forces, actually, the air defense, actually. So I know how many pilots we have in the Air Force who are able to properly operate the MiGs, and they are bringing the reserves, so we have enough personnel to even have shifts if needed. But as to the Bayraktars, I don't like BT2s. Do we have enough people who are trained to operate them? I would have loved to hear information that we do, because as of now, I haven't heard any clarifications on that. And then if we have some guys who are only like trainees under training, obviously it might just be like the wasteful usage of the equipment. So it's either better have them all is like in balance, or have something which we can actually use rather than something which might be really functional, but no one knows what to do with it. This is just my opinion.
Thank you. Wolverine, you?
So I was actually going to go back to when they were talking about the aircraft, the Russian aircraft and stuff like that. So what a lot of people fail to realize is the Russians do not utilize their aircraft in the same way that the United States does. There's a lot of missions they don't even use them for. One perfect example is SEAD, which is suppression of enemy air defenses and destruction of enemy air defenses also. So Russians actually use artillery for a lot of these SEAD missions and the DIAD. So whereas we will use a combination in the US, they will actually strictly do everything straight with artillery. So the Russians are heavily more reliant on artillery than the United States is. That's why if you look at the Russian inventory, they have so many different types of not only self-propelled, but towed guns. I mean, I think there's like 7 or 8 different types of artillery pieces that the Russians are using, and they have quite an immense number of a lot of those units. So that's just some of the things that kind of goes along with it. So when you think about Russian aircraft, you got to see what they use them for. Example, the Su-34 is actually an attack aircraft. So the Su-34 would be equivalent to like the U.S. Marines and the U.S. Navy's FA-18s. where the MiG-29s and the Su-27s are more kind of like akin to the F-16s and stuff like that. So, but just look at it when you're thinking about it as what they use them for, and you got to actually look at what their role is. Even though it may say multi-role, you actually need to look up and research that aircraft to see what it is actually capable of doing. Now, the one thing that the Russians also don't really need to rely on air sometimes for is, or not have as much, is also when you look at the number of surface-to-air missile and NIR artillery assets that they have. So in the U.S. we have, I think, 4 systems that I can think of. Okay, the Russians have 4 types of man-pads alone, and then they have, like, I don't know, another 7 or 8 different types of surface-to-air missile systems. So the Russians don't always, it seems like from what I've read and what I looked at, and I know there's one gentleman who's listening here who is good on the SAMs, the Russians put those things everywhere to control the sky instead of actually having the aircraft up in the sky sometimes. So I just want to kind of point some of that stuff out that, people don't always realize, is that we use our artillery different than the Russians do. And the last thing I was going to say is it was about when they talk about with self-propelled guns versus towed guns. So self-propelled guns, yes, they can move on their own. They can carry, munitions on the, it's stored inside the vehicle and all that stuff. But the thing is this: self-propelled guns actually require more maintenance than a towed gun does. And the good thing about a towed gun is that on a self-propelled, if the vehicle portion of it breaks down, the whole thing's done. Whereas on a towed gun, if the prime mover, which is a truck, breaks down, well, they can unhook it from the truck and hook it up to another truck and keep on moving. That's why generally you'll see that one artillery piece actually has not one truck assigned to it, but a minimum of at least 2 trucks. One is a prime mover, one is a secondary / ammo hauler. So that first truck breaks down, they can, unhook it, hook it to the second truck, transfer stuff over, and still continue on with the mission. So I just want to bring that up.
Thanks.
Yeah, yes.
Go ahead.
Can I just say my final comment, and I'll let
Yep,
you
absolutely.
let you have some time without me. So as far as I remember, from 1939, the artillery in the USSR was regarded as the goddess of war, and whoever had the upper hand on the artillery was by default considered as the winner. Like, correct me if I'm wrong. And yeah, the biggest difference in the usage of the artillery from what I've seen, you firstly would have never hit artillery on civilians, and you would have never placed your battle positions in the middle of the villagers or just covering. So just comparison with the normal civilized world and usage of artillery, it's just that doesn't work here. Yeah, overall, guys, thanks for such an insightful conversation that lasted for I don't know how many hours, 10, 12. Either way, it was really just great to hear you all, hear your support, laugh a little bit, much needed actually, because we hear like pretty much the whole day just walking like zombies and doing whatever we can. So sometimes it's really necessary. And yeah, keep doing what you're doing. If you have already donated to come back in live, well done. If you haven't, go check Walter's page. It's much needed here because we do have humanitarian crisis and I would say humanitarian catastrophe. And then yeah, stay safe, take care. See you in the next episode.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys.
And we have a number. Take care and good night, or have a
Good
good
morning.
day. Just good morning. Take a nap.
Sun came up in Germany
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So
You should have seen how my dog looked at me when I was laughing. Like, are you going nuts? Okay. Yeah. Bye, guys.
Great, take care. See ya. And we have a number of people requesting, so let's go in the order that it was. If I'm not mistaken, Peter, Ryan, Austin, and Akash. Akash just joined us. And then Aaron. Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to. I know that we've been focusing a lot upon the military stuff in just some of the prior comments, but I want to point out that this is really now a war of guns versus butter. You know, it's really a question of what's going to collapse first, the Russian military or the Russian economy. And the military could probably keep. We've been talking about the extensive stockpiles of munitions that Russia has, the thousands of tanks they have in warehouses. But really, the question at this point is what's going to break first, the Russian front lines or the Russian the stock market. And I think at this point, the market is probably going to be the determinant of whether they can sustain this war or not. But that's pretty much what I was going to say. In terms of the oil embargo, I want to give people an idea of the kind of scope or scale. The Russia basically exports about 5 million barrels a day. They produce about 10 million barrels a day and export about half of that 5 million barrels a day. The United States takes in a very, very relatively small amount of that. And yet we've been kind of like, hemming and hawing about putting a hard ban on that import. There's also beyond just the raw petroleum, there's also petroleum processed products that we've been importing. But in the overall scheme of things, we're not going to be impacted anywhere near this size of Europe. And I think that the Europeans, if anything, are a little bit of ahead of us about, basically saying that they're going to embargo Russian oil imports. That's a very hard decision for them. It's a relatively easy one for us. And, I'm hoping that our administration makes a change in the coming days about that. Again, it's something I think is long overdue, but that's something I would take a look at. Also, the other thing we were pointing out in the prior space is that even if the West bars these imports, it's not like Russia can just turn around and sell them anywhere. You need to change the entire infrastructure of how can you import stuff. China can only take so much. They would have to invest significantly in order, literally shifting petroleum carriers to the Pacific as opposed to being in the Atlantic or wherever. And I think that that's going to be a key challenge for Russia, is that they could end up with a glut of oil and crashing their oil market because they won't have anybody to pick up that slack. And even though we may be paying more at the pump for a while in the West, the Russian economy is going to grind to a very quick halt if they literally just are awash in oil and just cannot sell it anywhere. So that was it. I'm complete.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. I believe Ryan, and we'll go to
Akash
Austin and Akash and Austin.
Yeah. Just to make kind of just on this topic of Germany continuing to buy oil from Russia. So
It's not me again, just so you know. I'm not messing with you. This is like a longer than usual.
Don't need to continue purchasing from Russia. Need to.
Of course, I I have to come in and then it it's sort of it's like a
Parody,
fart
but make no
trying
mistake.
to get out. Only some of it gets out. Come on, audio.
Russia. I've gone through more hours today than I care to admit, again, trying to study his mind. And I pulled up some interviews with him and Oliver Stone. Oliver Stone, for those who don't know, is a famous American filmmaker. And he did a documentary where he interviewed Vladimir Putin in around 2017. And I want to read a quote from what Putin said in this interview. This was in 2017. Putin was asked by Oliver Stone if there was hope. Putin replied, "Hope? There's always hope until they're ready to bring us to the cemetery and bury us." This is a man that I just do not, I don't think these sanctions are going to have any, I do not believe they're going to make them stop. I think that Russia is going to continue to be the aggressor. And as Sergei Lavrov said the other day, these sanctions are simply attacks on our independence and our freedom.
Just to thank you very much. Just to add to that, because you were speaking about Germany, I'm not going to apologize what my government is doing and has been doing or not doing the last couple of decades, because it's horrible and appalling, frankly. But there was a really unexpected major policy shift the other day. You have read about it when we actually pumped up our defensive spending and stuff like that. So I'm fairly certain that we will see the embargo and the boycott of Russian gas and oil. Again, the European Commission has made deals with Saudi Arabia and the US as well for alternative sources, and I think even Germany will get to the point where we tap into those sources and get through the winter at least. I think that's the main concern in the political discussion right now.
And just one last thing on this, and this came up in our parliament here in Canada about, you know, we produce 5 million barrels of the traditional energy industry, and, you know, different forms of alternative energy. But again, it's a shift in thinking. Don't just think that Russia's the only place that can supply oil, because it's not. There's refineries everywhere. The stuff can be transported. It's just a shift in where you're going to buy the stuff from.
Obviously, that's the practical logistical problems. We are well aware. It's a political discussion of where to shift to, and I'm actually pretty glad that we have a strong green participation in the green, and to go completely self-sufficient, and we can do that, and that requires a political process and a lot of finances, but that's the way to go, I think. So Walter, you have the order. I completely lost it.
Akash, and then we'll let Chris Alexander speak as well. He requested, and then we'll move on to Austin, Aaron, Tanya, and code name Bosch.
Thank you, Walter.
Akash.
Thank you. Just to make the situation still more complicated, I think that we shouldn't lose sight of a parallel issue that is going on in international affairs that has bearing on all this, and that is the negotiations over the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, that is the Iran nuclear deal.
Exactly.
So Iran is a major producer of oil, and within the past few weeks, they've come tantalizingly close to the conclusion of an agreement that would allow Iran to return into compliance with the 2015 Nuclear Non-Proliferation Agreement, in exchange for which they would be allowed to resume selling oil on the international market. They have tens of millions of barrels of oil floating in barges right now and in container ships, and at full capacity they produce about 4 million barrels per day, which is roughly about 5% of the global supply. If it were possible to come to an agreement with them, it would be a major victory for diplomacy, not just in reducing the risk of nuclear proliferation through Iran, but also in freeing up additional oil for countries that are currently dependent on Russia to use. Perhaps not surprisingly, the fly in the ointment right now is Russia. Russia is a party to the Iran nuclear deal, along with the other nuclear powers and the European Union, and they have started demanding that they will not agree to the resumption of the Iran nuclear deal unless they are exempted from sanctions in their dealings with Iran. That is to say, that they will agree to proceed, they will agree to allow diplomatic talks to proceed to a conclusion only if they are allowed unrestricted purchase and sale of oil to Iran, which would make Iran an enormous hole in the sanctions net. It would effectively reduce the sanctions almost to meaninglessness. This is yet another example of the folly of making ourselves hostage to allowing Russia not only a seat at the table in diplomatic affairs, but granting it a veto. I have to believe that it is possible for the other powers to conclude an agreement with Iran, assuming that they can get adequate compliance out of Iran without allowing Russia to veto this by ousting them from the talks. But it is again an extraordinary demonstration of the recklessness and the short-sightedness of much of the international architecture that allows countries to become both economically and diplomatically hostage to a veto wielded by a country that we all know does not respect the rule of law. I hope that when this is all over, people will understand that. Thank you.
Sadly reminds me of the veto right of every European state within the EU 26 on major issues. But Chris, that's a diplomatic question field of view. Do you want to answer directly?
Yeah, I'd love to. Sorry to have broken off last time. My phone unexpectedly died, but yeah, on sanctions, I do see the focus initially on oil and then later on gas, which is more complex for Europe, especially. But there is movement on all those issues. And the point I was making, or I cut myself off, was that public opinion is quite firmly behind these measures, as long as they can be implemented in a way that is it's not going to be painless, but is as smooth as possible without unexpected breaks and loss of service and so forth. And it seems like that is being orchestrated, though the room to deepen reservoirs of political will and drive forward is still there. And that's why discussions like this are important. On the Iran nuclear deal, I think Akash's points are absolutely right. I would simply observe that there are actually two big flies in the ointment. One, Russia's ultimatum and demand, which is a huge problem for negotiators, but which really is a non-starter because public opinion has moved so quickly in the last 2 weeks on these issues that it is, I think, inconceivable that they would be given a carve-out that would, as Akash says, leave a gaping hole in the sanctions regime and what is increasingly an embargo regime. I think in our countries in Europe and North America and even more broadly, and that is that if there is truly a Russian, a strong political coalition opposing Russia's aggression in Ukraine, as there appears to be right now. And if Israel is part of that coalition and actually supporting Ukraine with field hospitals and so forth, as they are, and voting with the majority at the United Nations against Russia, then there is a potential change in the balance of power in Syria, which could, even after the conclusion of a new JCPOA, result in Russia no longer preventing Iran from attacking Israeli targets from Syria, which has been their policy up until now. And that was the reason for the Israeli Prime Minister's visit to Moscow and subsequent contacts and so forth. And so that is, Israel's security and Israel's security needs in the wake of an Iran nuclear deal are actually part of this equation, because Russia plays such a big role in Syria. And I'm not going to presume how that will play out at the moment, but it is a major fly in the ointment, given that Russia's reliability as even an ally of convenience in almost every conflict on around the world is being revised, and the consequences for Israel and all of those who are taking action have taken action or sanctioned Iran for their proxy wars in the Middle East are obvious.
Thank you. Austin?
Yeah, so I want to comment on a couple of things here. First off, in regards to Foreign Minister Lavrov's sort of ultimatum regarding the closing of Nord Stream 1 and the essential sort of Russian-driven blockade of continued flow of liquid natural gas towards Europe, I think it's been overwhelmingly clear that the sanctions put forth against Russia so far have been, in the near term, in regards to expectations on the Russian economy, entirely devastating. We've seen so far with the fall of the ruble, the fact that the Moscow Stock Exchange is still closed, everything like that. For Russia to unilaterally cut off on its own end the continued flow of liquid natural in the head. And I understand the difficult situation that various Western European states are being put in currently to sort of abide with this recent proposal to completely blockade the import of Russian-based petroleum goods, considering the various beds that they have made in regards to their reliance on those goods for the heating of their people's homes. And so in the near term, while I may blame the politicians in the past for sort of making this bed, I understand their hesitancy at valuing the continued flow of energy to their countries in the near term until sort of contingency supply lines can be set up to assuage those pains before they go through with it. That being said, I still expect them to go through with that. That being said, what I say by that is that I think that those threats for Russia to continue to sabotage itself, I think, are very empty. But specifically on top of that, I think there's a greater point to be made here, and I think Martin touched on it earlier, and as I think some of the Canadians here have as well, that we're sort of seeing the long-term consequences of not having concerted strategies towards energy independence or energy independence as beneficiaries of strategic allies. And I think as long as that remains a sort of unaddressed issue, we're likely to see similar occurrences of having to make very difficult diplomatic decisions, perhaps even against one's own allies, for the sake of preserving domestic energy markets. And I think that in and of itself makes for a very clear and relevant argument towards the continued pursuit of renewable and sustainable energy. and I'm not going to get into nuclear right now. I support nuclear energy, but we had a long conversation on that previously. However, there's one other topic I'd like to discuss that was discussed earlier, and that was sort of the ability of the Russian people to not necessarily sabotage, but potentially mitigate the continued war effort on behalf of the Russian Federation. And I think there tends to be a bit of an overfocus from the Western perspective on the actual power that the Russian populace has, especially considering that the Russian populace has been cut off from most major social media platforms. While I understand how critical that has been at preventing and mitigating the spread of misinformation, at the same time, that has also mitigated the ability of Russians who disagree with the government, that's mitigated their ability to organize amongst themselves and stage anything from protests to general strikes. And specifically in regards to protesting within the Russian Federation, I think we're going to continue to see protests in traditionally liberal democratic strongholds within Russia, such as St. Petersburg. But at the same time, with these organizational tools being stripped away, I think it'll be a lot harder for other groups to organize and resist the war movement there, which is why I think the far greater aspect that needs to be addressed is the continuing efforts to cripple the Russian economy and cripple the Russian military industrial complex. I think it is far more likely that with concerted effort, we see a collapse of the Russian war effort on a physical and an economic level. I think it's far more likely that we see that, and that's a feasible objective, than it is for a popular uprising to sort of usurp the Putin regime in the near term.
Exactly my point. Thank you very much. I would like to bring up a female person once in a while. So Tanya, you might be.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. I'll just chime in here for 2 cents before Tanya
Oh, sorry.
gets in. No worries. So in regards of the so-called isolation of Russia, again, it should be emphasized once again that they haven't been isolated so far. They haven't been isolated for 30 years after the collapse of Soviet Union. And when all of this started to spiral down was essentially probably in 2008, when so-called Russian liberals, they wholeheartedly supported Russian invasion of Georgia. I actually can name a few who did not, but they are limited to 5 fingers of my hand. So this is the extent of so-called Russian liberalism, unfortunately. So again, it should be emphasized that Russia wasn't isolated. Russian people had all the, means and knowledge of assessing of what is going on. Unfortunately for them, and unfortunately for us, and primarily unfortunately for Ukrainians, overwhelming majority of Russian people remain complicit. They decline as they have granted it for years and years. They cannot produce without North American technology. This group overall has to understand this. So, long story short, we have not had proper investment since 2014, and this is leading to this huge spike. So basically, this could just increase the timeline. So just something to be aware of and probably to discuss. Before I get it to Tanya, sorry for just stepping over slightly, maybe Chris can elaborate on that and I'll get back to Tanya right away.
Yeah, the dependence on Russian oil and gas need not have been as great as it was. And I think we need to understand that there was a Russian strategy that involved much more than market-based competition to ensure that that dependence was as great as possible. I mean, a lot of the political corruption that still hasn't been rooted out of Europe and North America had this as its goal, you know, especially in Germany, but in lots of other countries where Schroeder and others were anchored, locked in as strategic lobbyists. And the whole debate about nuclear energy, which we're not going to get into, as well as other sources of energy, as well as coal and so forth, played into a result that represented a greater role for Russia, which now everyone's struggling to extricate ourselves from. I think we all agree that the future, as Martin says, the future is green, the future is a full green transition. But in the meantime, we know that the world, including our democracies, continues to consume, I think Akash was saying something like 95 million barrels per day. And the intermediate step that I think presents itself as logical, defensible, and attractive in this situation where Russia is, you know, really deserves to be under embargo, is for the energy needs we still have, hydrocarbon and otherwise, to be met as much as possible by countries that are not malign, and preferably by fellow democracies. So here, obviously, Norway has a role to play in Europe. Canada and the United States have roles to play. The United States is now a net energy exporter, an LNG exporter, which was not only a few years ago. Canada's potential is greater than has been realized up until now. Pipelines aren't going to be built overnight, but there are rail options. There are transportation options that haven't been fully utilized, and we're in an emergency. So we should utilize them, as well as bringing the full weight of our full economic weight and our full bargaining power, as well as lobbying power, down on Saudi Arabia and other Qatar and other swing producers who really have choices to make. We know that the Russians will be playing hardball with them, blackmailing them in ways we probably don't always see. We need to be equally insistent that this not just result in an upward price spiral, but more supply, dwindling deliveries from Russia, as the ban on banks that can do business in Russia, the ban on capital market availability to Russia, and then ultimately the ban on sales and embargo, we hope, on sales of oil and gas move forward. It's complex. It's going to take time. There are speculators, we know, including big oil companies, that are trying to buy the dip and make money from this chaos. We need to be principled and rational. We all want to get beyond hydrocarbons, but in the meantime, we don't want hydrocarbon purchases fueling Russia's survival as a totalitarian fascist state, or the emergence of other players, dictatorships that are undermining democracy and undermining a rules-based international system.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
And back to you, Tanya. Sorry for overstepping. Sorry for that. The floor is yours.
No worries. I was just going to share a little bit about what everyday Russians know or don't know about the outside in the current situation, just based on my communications with 2 Russian families. And this is going to be probably a little bit different to your point of view, Walter. And this is just what they're telling me. So I'm not, defending them or taking a side. I'm just sort of sharing, what they've told me. One family lives in a more rural area. They are against the war. They were also against Russia's annexation of Crimea. They know that their government is controlling the media and that it's full of propaganda. So neither family watches TV because of this. There used to be a few websites they could access to get more objective news, but those have all been shut down now. And the other family lives in the city. They actually live in St. Petersburg. They're against Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but they were actually in favor of Russia's annexation of Crimea because they legitimately believed that Russian speaking people were being oppressed there. For the Russians who speak at least some English, they used to have more options in terms of how to get information, but now they really don't have any. Their access to information's always been kind of limited, but it's just a lot worse now. Both families in the past couple of days have scrubbed their social media, removed the mentions that they had about what's happening with the Ukraine just because the penalties are so severe. They still are managing to access the social media sites, which are supposed to be blocked. So I'm not sure how they managed to do that, but I guess they've been dealing with us a long time. So they do kind of know how to get around certain things. They've told me that the population is about 50-50 split. The older generation, the babushkas, mostly support Putin. They believe the propaganda about the Nazis and that Russians and former Soviet states are being oppressed, whereas the younger people mostly don't support Putin, but they're just afraid to speak out about it now, especially people with families who depend on them. They can't afford to be in jail, and have nobody there to feed their families. Neither family thought that Putin would actually invade Ukraine. They also don't think, and they still don't think that Putin would use nuclear weapons. They just don't think that he would take it that far. But they're all really shocked by what's happening right now because they thought Putin was mostly bluster. They kind of had gotten used to that about him. So nobody thought that he would take it this far. So they are feeling kind of like in uncharted territory. So for the Russians, I don't think that they know necessarily as much as we might think about the objective truth, especially for a lot of people that don't speak English. But this has been definitely a huge wake up call for them. And I think moving forward, they'll be motivated to work harder to get outside information about things. And maybe for the West, from our perspective, we can maybe think about how to make more information accessible to them in Russian. But for now, despite having this huge wake up call, there just isn't really much that they can do about it now, because they're to the point where people are being stopped on the street and getting their phones checked. So I don't know how many people will feel that they can speak out now. And I think also, this is my opinion, is I think it will depend also on how bad the sanctions get for them. Right now, the sanctions aren't really impacting them as much as it looks like to us because a lot of people don't bank at those banks that are on the sanctions list. Those are mainly like the big banks that the Kremlin uses. And, these 30%, these other banks are the banks that the people are using. So as long as your bank is not on the sanctions list, it's not really affecting you. And even if the ruble is, down to a cent, that only affects you if you're trying to buy something international. So they're like traveling, they're buying train tickets, they're going out to eat, and the prices have gone up a little bit for them in the past week, but not really that much. So I think if, the sanctions start affecting more banks, because right now the banks are even taking advantage of the people, like the banks that aren't sanctioned are putting out ads saying, come bank with us and giving people really good rates and, kind of advertising that, they're not affected by the sanctions. So people are taking advantage of these opportunities. And I think personally, I think if these banks are all added to the sanctions list, then all of a sudden it starts getting harder to do things because right now for the regular people, um, it's not really affecting them very much, or not as much as we would think. So that's just what I wanted to share, and you could take it or leave it, but that's just what they're telling me about what they know or don't know about things.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So that said, this anecdotal experience kind of further potentiates the idea that sanctions should be further built upon because, again, according to this anecdotal experience, even though they had the understanding of what is happening, and they absolutely have the understanding what is happening now and what kind of war crimes Russian army perpetrates in Ukraine, they are still reluctant to act, and because, well, they ponder what is going on, they assess it, but it still doesn't affect them directly, right? When it starts to actually affect them, maybe then in this situation they will consider actually being more proactive finally in regards of their government and local authorities. So far, they're just still pondering and assessing what actually their government and Russian army perpetrates in Ukraine.
Yeah, and to that point, I mean, one of the families, I talked to more, and when the sanctions first happened, I like hurry up and got on PayPal and I sent him some money and I said, "Hey, go stock up, go buy things. Like I'm worried about what's going to happen to you. Like these are the first of the sanctions. I'm sure there's going to be more. This is horrible and I know it's not your fault and I don't want you to starve to death." And like what did he do? He went and bought himself a first class train ticket to Kazan and like went there and is on a big old trip now, eating out at fancy restaurants. And I'm just so annoyed because, I specifically told him, like, stay home, buy what you need. Like, stuff is going to get bad.
But that
Don't, like, blow
really
your money on a
sounds
trip,
like a Russian cliche. Yeah, that really sounds like a
Sounds like
Russian
many Russians I've met too. Yeah.
Yeah, in face of pending doom, it's like, oh, what am I going to do? I drink myself into oblivion in a nice hotel with a sauna and stuff like
Yes,
that.
that's what's
It's
happening
called the
right now with
Oblomov,
all my money.
the Oblomov effect. The in times of trouble, Russians turn to dissipation, escapism.
Yeah. So I mean, it's shocking because PayPal's been shut down now. So like, if they need more money, how am I going to get it to them? And I don't even want to give them more money now that I know what they're doing with it. I mean, they're just completely in denial about the whole thing. But that's my own beef about it. So you guys don't need to hear about that. But it's just like you said. I mean, it has to affect them personally, and it has to be like happening now for them to really notice it because they're not like planning ahead.
Thank you. We have one of our listeners waiting for a long time. Code name Bosch.
Hey, I hope all y'all are having a good evening or a good day wherever you're at. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have been waiting for a minute, so I've written down a few talking points. So bear with me here. Peter, I feel like me and you are following each other. We always end up in the same channels. The conflict, ever since the beginning, has been extremely uncertain and unpredictable.
It's a war, not a conflict.
War, sure.
Invasion. If you want.
Invasion, atrocities, war crimes, all the above. The actions of both Putin and his military have been unpredictable. I don't think any of us would have imagined it going the way that it's gone. But I have a fear that it's kind of opened up a Pandora box internationally. I think there's a lot of issues that have risen to the table, such as when we were talking about oil. I was reading some stuff the other day stating about how the United States was looking into alternative suppliers for oil, Venezuela, Iran, etc. I know we touched on Iran. Where do we draw the line at that? I know some of it can be seen as a win for diplomacy, but at the same time, also some of it can be seen as supporting and fueling the pockets of Western adversaries. I spent 6 years in the Air Force in a air wing that was tasked with a nuclear mission. So a lot of this stuff is not foreign to me. It's stuff that I've been doing. People are talking about like World War III and a nuclear on nuclear attack. I don't think that'll ever happen. That's mutual assured annihilation. It's not going to happen. But I do think that one of y'all brought up a good point earlier about there being a, looking into the possibility of like a false flag incident, especially with WMDs, with Belarus giving Putin the foothold to move nuclear weapons into their country. I think that makes that more plausible. Not saying that those would be nukes that would be used, but other weapons of mass destruction would definitely favor Putin's agenda. They're going to another point that somebody made about MiG-29 pilots and the Western troops or Western forces having access to MiG-29 pilots. I know, as my experience in the Air Force flies a lot of other airframes than what we fly offensively. There are a lot of airframes that we fly in training roles, just as your special operation forces are trained on more platforms than just your standard M4 carbine. They're trained with AKs, they're trained with all sorts of Eastern Bloc weapons. The same thing goes with airframes. The best way to test an American-made airframe is to fly it up against a adversary's aircraft. So I wouldn't doubt it one bit that we have pilots available for the MiG-29 platform. On the other hand, I thought somebody brought up a good point about how the Air Force, their Air Force tactics different than our Air Force tactics. That was really interesting. Ask for a glass of milk. Putin is a thief, and as a police officer with my current job now, I know that if there's one thing that thieves will continue to do, that is steal things. They don't stop just because you slap their wrist. They don't stop because you hurt their pocketbook. They stop when you force them to stop. And unfortunately, that has come down to with him being a force on force that needs to take place in some way, shape, or form in whatever that is. I think that it needs to be aggressive. I think it needs to be swift, and I think it needs to be united. I think that this unfortunate situation has done something good internationally, and that is brought a lot of us together in a bipartisan way, where we're able to unite and create a front against a common adversary. I think it's also forced us to be honest about a lot of things. I see people bringing up some stuff that we have avoided talking about for a while, and I think it's about time that we start talking about those issues. But I want to thank you for the chance to talk. If there's any questions or anything about what I said, feel free to ask.
Absolutely. Does anyone have a question for Code?
I do. Did you fly? So you were tasked with a nuclear mission. Were you B-52 or B-2 bombers?
So I was tasked. The air wing that I was a part of was a refueling wing. Our refueling wing was tasked to support strategic bomber aircraft. So a lot of the red flag drills, nuclear drills, and things like that, I'm very familiar with.
Okay. Awesome. I also got an update for anybody listening. Is it okay to go ahead, Walter? If this is some kind of false flag, it could be, or they're trying not to be targeted. We'll see. Also, another thing is, I'm not sure if any of you guys know, but I guess the Su-24 fencers, the Russians apparently are starting to use them now. And so, they're a pretty credible fighter bomber, swept wing aircraft. Quite it's a formidable unit, like the Su-34, but is now, but now we know that, of course, they're using civilian GPS units, so that's one turn down from them. Okay, yeah, just some of the updates. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron.
Just to add more info on that, if you don't mind. So that Russian, those tanks were spotted along the Belarusian border. So if you go on my profile and you have a look at the pinned tweet, so along the broad side of the tank, it's not that visible, but from what we make it out to be, it looks like the Kazakhstani flag. And then when you compare, so if you've been following this Kazakhstan, actually, if
These are being, yeah.
Kherson, Melitopol.
Wasn't Kherson taken though?
It was taken.
It was.
Yeah. 45 helicopters. Yeah.
Berdyansk,
Yeah.
Melitopol, Kherson.
Yeah.
March. It's to you.
Okay.
March.
So yeah, those the vehicles we saw on that, the vehicles I saw on that, there's more of them, but the BMP2s and others. And I could understand totally if Kazakhstan is going to join in on this. I just think that it's stupid for them to do so. It's true that they needed some Russian peacekeepers to come in there and help their president. But I guess in a sense, when you think back now I remember, it is not so shocking.
So, hey, is my sound coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, it's nice to finally talk to you all. I've been enjoying our space here tonight. I wanted to ask a military question. Is that too far off of topic?
Absolutely not. So I believe
All right.
Codename Bosch would be able to answer that.
So, if we go back a few weeks to when we were watching the buildup before the war, before the main hostilities started, we would see trainloads and trainloads, and there was a lot of artillery there, but there was also a whole lot of air defense equipment, like S-400 systems, S-300 systems, and Buk systems. Just seemed like they were in every third rail car. So, I mean, the Russians have had weeks to set that stuff up and get it working, right? I mean, how in the world is the Ukrainian Air Force able to fly over this country?
Logistically, there's a lot of different reasons. Logistically, failures in strategy. I think that the systems don't work as well as what the Russians say they do. There's many reasons for that, really.
Aaron, I'll add to that. I think that on one hand, I have heard of some Russian S-300s in Ukraine, not very many, and few and far between. I don't want to say a flop. to why you haven't been able to see their and I think they're lacking in the manpower department.
I totally agree. Yeah, it's moralized too.
Well, let's hope they don't get their stuff together and it stays this way.
So another thing I was going to just say is that they've failed in every way to do, suppression of, any sort of surface-to-air missiles or anti-aircraft artillery. They can't operate in these skies, and they're operating so infrequently that whenever they do enter the space, and in such small numbers, that they just have no masses in order to maintain any sort of like close air support or combat air patrol. Like they just come in piecemeal, and then they get shot down, and then they leave piecemeal. Like there is no strategy.
Well, I mean, some of their air defense equipment is getting killed by a drone from. I don't think, why does that air defense not able to?
And to attack a Kurdish militia in North anti-air defense capabilities.
Well, I mean, let's just be honest. The use of like these kind of like the ZSU-23 type, and all of that, there was no opposition air force in Syria, so they were literally using anti-aircraft guns as just anti-personnel, light armored units.
Which is very effective.
Yeah. In this, every fuel dump that was supplied to the Russian army probably had percentage X subtracted from it. Every new weapons program had a certain amount of the claimed spending diverted in other directions. Testing, final commissioning of weapon systems was not completed. We see that in their communications. We see that in across the board in a number of areas. And same for salaries, same for logistics budgets, same for everything. And it's incredibly demoralizing when you go to mobilize assets that are there on paper and they are literally not there. And we know that Putin's economic model has relied on corruption. There are oligarchs and people close to Putin who actually think that a system based on corruption works better than a rules-based, accountability-based system. But I think
nepotism,
they're finding
mainly nepotism.
Yeah, it's nepotism, but it's always, if you can't get people to move, you pay them a backhander. In the military context, it means a lot of the resources flow out of the military capabilities budget that you're trying to fund, and the consequences. There are a lot of reasons for Russian failure so far, but that is a big one that was not assessed properly, I don't think, fully in the run-up to this invasion and this war.
I have another question, if it's okay.
Okay.
So let's say this deal goes through and the MiG-29s are delivered to Ukraine, and how easy is it to distinguish